Hey everybody, what's going on? It's time for a new episode of LonsTV. I'm a little late to the game because I'm going to do a Sucker Punch review, and I feel like everyone in the world has already seen and reviewed Sucker Punch. It's like the most reviewed movie of the year so far, and a lot of the reviews have been a lot of fun. IO9 did a big long piece about it that was pretty funny, and Stupid for Movies had this really long, not really long, but really intense rant about it. And I'll touch on a lot of those issues that they raise as well, but I wanted to give my own 2 cents. I saw it last night. I knew it was supposed to be really bad, but curiosity got the best of me, and I see all those kind of cult movies like this, and I didn't want to be left out of the conversation. And it was playing right down the street at the Vista, which is my favorite theater here in LA, so, I went to go see it. And it is, just like everybody's saying, it is bad. I don't think it's like the worst movie I've even seen just this year. I mean, I've seen a lot of movies this year because I was doing This Week in Movies, but I would say I enjoyed Sucker Punch. Like, I was more entertained by it than Battle LA, which was just a slog and boring, and I just found it totally uninteresting. And Sucker Punch is a failure, but like a really ambitious, weird, interesting, idiosyncratic failure. It is bad, but it's not bad, I think, the way most people have been saying it's bad, or it's not bad in the way I was expecting it to be bad. It really is not trying to be a dramatic film or an action film. Like, I think most people, that's their knock on it, is that it's not, conventionally satisfying as like, a drama, that we don't get to know anything about these characters. Their plight isn't interesting. Their path to freedom is not compelling. And it's basically telescoped within the first 10 minutes of the movie where we're sort of told what's going to happen before it happens. And all those things are true, but I don't think it's trying to be that. I think it's really much more like a musical. And I know this is going to sound silly because it's such a broad, goofy, mainstream cult kind of movie, but it really has more in common with a musical or an opera or even a ballet than a regular narrative film. Because like a mainstream narrative film is about character development and plot and then spectacle, like, in third place. So it's like, put some people in it that you're going to enjoy spending time with, or some funny dialogue, make them compelling and their relationships compelling, and then have a story that's like, at 5 minutes this happens, and at 10 minutes this happens, that like moves forward and has momentum, and then, put in some action or some romance and sex or whatever to keep people sort of engaged. And that's what traditional narrative movies do, and this movie is really much more like, the plot is what little there is, and the characters they're all just placeholders. It's really like if you went to go see the ballet, and it's about the spectacle. It's like, the story of Swan Lake isn't why people go see Swan Lake, it's the movement and the dancing and the music and the sets and the experience. And I get that that's what Zack Snyder was going for with this. And I feel like most of the reviews I've read do not acknowledge that this is more like Moulin Rouge. Now, maybe you hate Moulin Rouge. I know a lot of people who do. And even stylistically, this is kind of similar. Like, it moves really fast, it's really colorful, and there's tons of effects going on, and it's, it's like sensory overload. And this movie is really going for a lot of the same things, only instead of being an actual musical, there's lots of music, but it's more focused on, like, action and effects and that kind of movement instead of, like, dancing and song. So, I mean, yeah, everybody who's been knocking it, like, well, I don't care about these characters, and there's so many different levels of reality going on in the movie that I never had time to invest in any, like, I agree with all that, but it's sort of not to the point. Like, he didn't have to succeed in that way. He could have succeeded just by making the film pure spectacle. And if it worked on that level, just like Moulin Rouge, where you don't have to care about Ewan McGregor to enjoy Moulin Rouge, it's the music and the experience of taking it all in. So I think, in principle, this could have worked. The bare bones story, which is, it's about a girl, she's 20 years old, but she dresses like she's, sort of 12, blonded with pigtails, and she's put in a mental asylum. It's kind of a complicated backstory that plays out in the opening scene. Basically, her evil stepfather killed her mom and then killed her sister, and he's blamed her for it, and she's sent to this mental asylum, and in 5 days, she's going to be lobotomized. And the person who lobotomizes her is a cameo that I won't spoil and is really weird and unexpected. So she has 5 days to, like, figure out a way to escape. But meanwhile, as soon as she gets into the mental asylum, she enters this fantasy that she's a prostitute and they're in this sort of evil bordello where they're being held against their will, and there's this like weird madam who's making them learn these like elaborate burlesque routines, and this evil pimp who's like beating them and making them be prostitutes. So that the whole movie is in that prostitute world, and it does immediately make you think like there's something weird with Zack Snyder. I mean, I kind of already knew that. 300 is a very like weird movie, especially in terms of sexuality. This one is as well. If you find that it's not sexy at all, which is a big fault, and I'll get to like how it fails as just pure spectacle in a bit, but one of the reasons is it's about all these women, they're playing strippers, they're all beautiful women, all the stars of the movie, and none of them get to look hot, none of them get to be sexy for the entire film. They're always crying and about to get raped, or they just got raped, or they're being beaten, and it's just brutal and never sexy and just cruel, and they're just sad and miserable the entire film. And I just really didn't get that. It would be exactly like if Moulin Rouge, they were just weeping in every scene. Like, no, there has to be like, in that kind of story, in any kind of story, there's happy moments and sad moments. I don't know why the women have to be so devastated for the entire movie and never allowed to like be sexy even for a scene. They're playing strippers, you would think. They're playing strippers and prostitutes. You would think that they would be allowed to like, and then they're dressing sexy, but it's not a sexy setup at all. So anyway, but yeah, like, so there's that level of abstraction going on, and then every time the main character does one of her routines and she uses it to distract them, to help the other strippers to plot their escape or whatever, we go into even another level of fantasy, which is where the action scenes happen, and it's all set to music, there's no dialogue, and it's always like classic rock songs remixed, and I'll talk more about the use of music later. But so that's a movie. It's like so many different levels of abstraction. You're not ever really kind of sure what the level of reality you're going back to is, or what about this is real and what's all in their heads and what the other girls are experiencing in addition to the main character. And so I get that people are leaving it like, what? And thinking it's not satisfying as like a normal traditional movie would be. But okay, it could have worked. But here's why it doesn't even work on the pure spectacle level. And I should say, as pure spectacle, there are sequences and individual moments that do work. There's this one setting that's like this feudal Japan samurai movie inspired setting, and it looks really cool, and the villains look cool, and there's one in the poster that's like this big Japanese statue that's firing like a minigun, and like it looks cool, and the effects work for me, and the action in that scene is kind of fun. And actually, that's an earlier fantasy. And while that was on, I was like, you know what, this may not be as bad as people think. I think people are just misreading the movie. It sort of went downhill from there. But, so anyway, my point is that some of the effects are good, some of the moments are good, some of the action's good. He doesn't do that annoying shaky cam Paul Greengrass nonsense, so you can actually see the action that's happening sometimes. And the guy's a talented guy. Visually, he's very talented. I think it's hard to deny that, which is why I think his Dawn of the Dead movie's good. I thought Watchmen was good. I'm still looking forward to Superman even after this movie. But I think overall, the movie's not that successful as spectacle. There's so many effects, there's so much going on, it's busy, and it all kind of blows past you. I feel like if the movie had slowed down a bit, I could have, and there's a lot of slow-mo, that's not what I mean, but I mean, the overall pace of these sequences, I could have taken in more and maybe appreciated more of the artistry of what I was seeing instead of it's sort of a mile a minute and there's so much being thrown in. The girls, as I mentioned, not only not sexy, but they don't really seem to like know what they're supposed to be doing in the action, fantasy, spectacle parts. Like, they seem pretty at home as the prostitutes, but then once you get them as like soldiers and they're in like Gears of War attire and they're shooting at people, like, they just don't seem like they know whether they're supposed to really be in the reality of this scenario or whether they know it's a fantasy or they're happy about it. Like, they just kind of seem confused, and so you never really get into them. Like, they're sort of all, it's kind of all flat, all the female performances, when it should be, we should like them. We should find, I mean, we don't have to like get to know them as characters, but we should root for them, at least in these sequences. The other thing about the genre mashups, like Kill Bill, a lot of people have mentioned Kill Bill because that's another movie where a director like puts every single other kind of movie that he likes into the movie. And it's a good point of reference because what Tarantino does that makes Kill Bill and his other movies so good, and the Coen brothers too, when they reference old genres, is he really adopts the style of those on genres. He's doing two things at once in Kill Bill. He's taking like spaghetti westerns or 70s crime and suspense movies or, kung fu movies, and he's taking recognizable bits and pieces of them and recreating them very recognizably. I mean, the Pai Mei sequence in Kill Bill looks like, an old Shaw Brothers or 70s kung fu movie. And so he's both replicating these old styles and then using them to advance this new story he's telling. So a perfect example is when the bride sees somebody she recognizes that she wants to get revenge on, and we close in on their eyes, and it's like that, boop, boop, boop. Like he's taking a 70s like exploitation, blaxploitation sort of effect and moment, but using it to advance his own story about Uma Thurman as the bride wanting to get revenge. That's the genius of Kill Bill and of Tarantino. Zack Snyder's not doing that. He's basically just taking every little like aspect of cult movies he likes and just jamming it all together. Like there's no rhyme or reason to it whatsoever. First of all, we're in the fantasy mind of this 20-year-old girl. Like, are these the things that she's obsessed with? Like robots and zombies and science fiction? And I mean, I don't want to be misogynist. There are plenty of like geeky girls that are into that, but wouldn't you establish that early on? Like, it seems more like a 13-year-old's masturbatory fantasy than a 20-year-old woman's fantasy. And I don't mean to get like comments like, hey, I'm a girl and I love zombies. I know girls love zombies and all that stuff. It seems it clashes, and we're never like, if we were shown a scene in the beginning where she's got like a ninja poster up over her bed and it established like she's a geek and she loves these kinds of movies, okay, but it doesn't have any reason to suddenly show up. And he's really like, I'm not against the idea of insane stripper soldiers engaging robot zombie Nazis in World War I style trench warfare. Let me make that clear. I'm pro that. But like, the movie doesn't feel like a World War I movie or a zombie movie or a soldier, movie or a stripper movie. Like, he doesn't really get into any of those genres. It's just all in his movie. It always feels like a Zack Snyder movie, so like shiny and in slow motion. And that just makes it inherently uninteresting, and I think that's why you saw so many comments on the web that were disappointed, like, Zack Snyder managed to make robot Nazi zombies boring, and I love those. And it's like, you love movies that feel like Nazi zombie movies. You don't love movies that just happen to have Nazi zombies sitting around not doing anything. And that's the problem here. He's like putting them in the movie and then not engaging them, which is frustrating because you're seeing things that you love. You're like, hey, those are robot soldiers. I love those. Like, let's have a scene with them. And then they're just there and then they're gone and they really have nothing to do with anything else that you've seen. Finally, because I know I'm going way long, the music choices. Like, I feel like this should have been a musical. Hear me out. Like, you have these women, 5 female main characters. Some of them are even like, Vanessa Hudgens is in the movie and she sings. She's been in musicals. And instead of anybody singing on camera, we have these like, it's like White Rabbit and Search and Destroy. There's one Bjork song that's pretty cool that's used. But other than that, it's like classic rock Beatles songs. And they're remixed like in this sort of bland electronic remix kind of sort of way. And that's the soundtrack for these whole action sequences. And it's just boring. The music's not good. It's not compelling on its own merits. And I think it would be more interesting if the girls were singing during these scenes. Like, it's like a musical and nobody ever sings. Like, that's what's sort of weird and frustrating about it. I don't know why you do that. And also just the song choices themselves. Like, White Rabbit in a movie that's about, like, psychedelic, trippy fantasies. Could you be any more pedestrian? I mean, that song's not in enough movies, and it's not associated already in enough other art with the psychedelic movement. You have to come in 2011 and put it's just cheesy. So that's my extended takedown of Sucker Punch. I mean, all in all, I know I've spent 13 minutes or so now slamming it. I didn't hate it as much as I sort of expected to. It's just disappointing because it sets up something that is so bold and weird to try to do this. Like, to try to do, like, Across the Universe, but instead of being Julie Taymor and doing Beatles songs, you're Zack Snyder and doing it with, like, samurai, gunslinging, whatever, strippers. So it's just, like, that has so much promise that the fact that it's not great is disappointing. But, but interesting, and unlike Battle LA and a lot of other crap I've seen this year, he is at least trying to do something, unique and different, and I gotta give him credit for that. So that's LonsTV for today. I will do my best to come back tomorrow and maybe even the next day and the next day after that. Thanks, everybody. If you like what you've seen, rate the video, subscribe it, do all that good YouTube stuff, and I will see you next time.